Some moments in history are built to be remembered, documented, celebrated, replayed, until they become part of the permanent record. But there is another category of moment, rarer, more revealing, more dangerous in what it exposes about the people inside it, that is built specifically to disappear, to be sealed away from the world, not out of shame, but out of the understanding that some truths are too raw, too complete, too human for public consumption. This is the story of one of those moments. A fight that 9 people witnessed in a small private training hall in Hong Kong in the early 90s. A fight so stripped of pretense, so devoid of performance, so honest in its violence and its resolution, that every person present agreed before leaving the room to carry what they had seen in silence for 40 years. Not because what happened was shameful, because what happened was real in a way that the world's version of Bruce Lee, the legend, the icon, the man who existed increasingly as mythology rather than human being, could not have absorbed without distortion. 40 years passed. Old men reached the end of their own lives and decided, carefully and quietly, that the world had finally waited long enough. This is what they saw. To understand why this fight happened, you need to understand the specific tension that Bruce Lee's existence created within the martial arts world of that era. He had done something that traditional practitioners experienced not just as innovation, but as challenge, as an implicit argument that everything they had dedicated their lives to preserving needed to be questioned. His development of Jeet Kune Do was not simply a new technique set, it was a philosophical position. The position that no fixed style, however ancient and however refined, could claim superiority over a living methodology that shed what didn't work and kept only what did. To practitioners whose entire identity was organized around a specific tradition. This was not intellectual disagreement, it was provocation. The challenge that reached Bruce arrived through the network that serious martial artists have always maintained alongside the official institutional structures, the underground current of challenge and response that operates through whispers and trusted intermediaries, rather than public announcements. A traditional Chinese martial artist, hard style, years of iron conditioning behind him, wanted to settle the question in the only language that answers it definitively. Not in print, not in philosophical debate, on a floor with nothing between them and reality. His name was never made public. It remains unknown. What he wanted was known to everyone in that network who heard about it. He wanted to demonstrate that the old ways, the ways Bruce had positioned his entire system as an evolution beyond, still worked. That tradition was not a limitation. That Bruce Lee, whatever his reputation, was a man, and men, under sufficient pressure, reveal their limits. Bruce accepted. The conditions he accepted alongside the fight were as significant as the acceptance itself. No public presence. No film. No documentation. 9 witnesses, personally selected. Each one a figure of standing within serious martial arts circles. Each one trusted with secrets of this kind. Whatever happened in that room would remain in that room for 40 years from the date of Bruce's death. Only then, if any of them chose, could they speak. That was the agreement. Every one of the 9 signed their name to it. The training hall was the kind that serious practitioners maintain, specifically because they need a space that doesn't exist for show. No sign on the door, no welcoming windows, plain wooden floor, bare walls, the functional simplicity of a room designed for one purpose only. The 9 witnesses arrived separately, quietly, the way people arrive to things that are not supposed to be happening. They seated themselves in a low semicircle, perhaps 6 feet from the space where the fight would occur, close enough that nothing would be filtered, that every breath and every impact and every decision would be observable without obstruction. They understood what they were being asked to witness. They understood why the agreement had been written the way it had been written. Bruce arrived and the witnesses noted immediately that something in his presentation was different from what they had seen in demonstrations, in training, in the controlled environments where he was always the acknowledged master of the room. He stretched briefly and practically, preparing without performance. His face carried the focused calm of someone who had assessed a situation accurately and arrived at a clear understanding of what it required. But his eyes held something that the witnesses would spend decades trying to name precisely. Not fear, something closer to recognition. The awareness of a man who understood that what was coming was not going to be the kind of exchange he controlled from the beginning. That this opponent was real in a way that changed the parameters of what the afternoon held. The opponent entered and his physical presence communicated the content of his training immediately. Where Bruce's body was all efficiency, lean, defined, every visible structure existing because it served a specific function, the challenger was built in the traditional way. Broad chest, heavy arms, legs that announced decades of stance training and iron conditioning. He was perhaps an inch taller than Bruce. He looked like a man whose training had made him dense rather than fast, powerful rather than precise. He looked at Bruce across the small space with an expression that contained real respect and real mission simultaneously. He was not here from hatred. He was here from conviction. He believed in something and he had come to defend it in the most direct terms available. He bowed. Bruce bowed. The room understood that what would follow was going to honor both of those gestures even as it tested everything they represented. There was no referee, no called start, no rules to explain, because the agreement was the only rule. Two fighters, this space, until one could not continue, they began to circle. The challenger attacked first with a straight punch that carried 20 years of conditioning behind it. Iron fist technique. The kind that can penetrate through blocks and breaks boards that most people cannot break with their whole bodies. Bruce slipped it by the margin that his training made available and counter-struck to the ribs with 3 rapid punches. The sound was solid, and the challenger absorbed them with the expression of someone who had trained specifically to receive this kind of impact and keep moving. His conditioning was not exaggerated by reputation. Bruce's strikes, which had dropped trained fighters cleanly in other contexts, registered on this man and did not drop him. He reset. They circled. The witnesses were already adjusting their expectations. They had come expecting to watch Bruce's philosophy validate itself cleanly, expected the traditional power and the innovative precision to produce the outcome that the innovation argued it would. What they were watching was more complicated than that. This opponent was not intimidated and was not outmatched in the ways they had anticipated. He was real, and his realness was changing the atmosphere in the room. The combination came on the challenger's second attack. High, low, middle, the sequencing of traditional training executed with speed that the witnesses hadn't fully credited when they looked at the man's muscular frame. Bruce blocked and redirected and was not clean in either. One punch found the gap that the combination was designed to open and connected with Bruce's jaw, not at full extension, not with everything behind it, but with enough. Bruce's head moved with the impact. The witnesses heard themselves make small involuntary sounds, the audible response of people watching something they had believed could not occur. Bruce stepped back. He touched his jaw. He tasted blood. He looked at the challenger, and the 9 people in that room watched something change in his eyes. The testing phase, the reading, the calibration, the careful accumulation of information ended. What replaced it was the recognition that this required everything. What came next occupied approximately 15 seconds of real time and 40 years of memory. Bruce closed the distance with a completeness of commitment that was different from technique, or rather it was technique and something beyond technique simultaneously, the product of physical preparation and the specific mental state that genuine danger produces in people who have trained for decades in how to respond to it. He struck 7 times across 3 seconds. Fists, elbows, knees, each one landing with the authority of something aimed rather than thrown. The challenger defended with everything his training had given him, and it was not enough to stop all of it, but it was enough to stop him from falling. He took the accumulation and stayed upright and found the opening that Bruce's offensive commitment had left briefly exposed. A hook delivered with the mass and leverage of traditional power training caught Bruce in the ribs. The sound it produced in the small wooden room was the sound of real force meeting real structure. Bruce's breath left him. He moved back 2 steps. His body had registered it. The witnesses sat frozen with the absolute stillness of people watching something they had no category for. Bruce Lee, the man who had been built into something beyond ordinary physical limitation in the public understanding of him, was marked, was breathing hard, had been hurt by an opponent who had not yet fallen, and the challenger was still there, still present, his ribs almost certainly damaged, his breathing labored, his movements carrying the accumulated cost of the exchange, but standing and refusing to be finished. They fought for another 2 minutes that passed the way extreme experience always passes, as something both endless and instantaneous, time losing its ordinary relationship with duration, when what is happening inside it is operating at this intensity. Each exchange took something from both men. Bruce's face carried swelling and blood. The challenger's ribs had absorbed damage that was going to require weeks to recover from. Neither fell, neither stopped. Then came the moment that justified the 40-year silence. Bruce caught an incoming kick, controlled the limb, swept the supporting leg. The challenger went down with the full impact of a person who has been structurally compromised mid-movement and has nothing left to catch themselves with. Bruce followed him down, landing with a knee on his chest and an elbow raised above his face, already committed to the downward trajectory that would end the fight definitively. He stopped, 6 inches from the man's face, his arm held in the position it had been moving toward, trembling with the effort of arresting the force that had been behind it. His eyes were the eyes of someone standing at the boundary between two different outcomes, both of them still present, neither of them yet selected. The room held the specific silence of 9 people not breathing. He stayed in that position for what the witnesses would later describe as 10 seconds, though they acknowledged that time in that moment was not operating normally. Then he lowered his arm. He stood. He stepped back. He extended his hand. The challenger lay on the floor breathing with difficulty, possibly with broken ribs, his face unmarked because of a decision made in a fraction of a second by the man who had just proven he could have done otherwise. He looked up at Bruce with an expression that contained no ambiguity. He took the offered hand and was helped to his feet. They stood facing each other, both damaged, both present, both alive, and bowed. The depth and the time held in both bows communicated everything that neither man said aloud. Not concession, not victory. Something more honest than either of those. 2 people who had taken each other all the way to the edge and found that the edge was not the end of the story. The challenger left quietly. He returned to his traditional training and never claimed anything about that afternoon publicly. His name remained unrecorded. His decision to accept the fight and his conduct within it and his dignity afterward were witnessed by 9 people who kept their word about all of it. Bruce sat on the floor of the small training hall, and the 9 witnesses came forward one by one. Some offered water, some offered cloth. Most simply sat near him in the silence that seemed like the only honest response to what the room had just contained. He asked them before they left to honor the agreement, not for a year, not for 10, 40 years from his death. After the legend had become fixed in the public understanding, after enough time had passed for people to have forgotten, or perhaps never learned, that he was a man who bled and struggled and made choices that required something of him. After enough time for the truth to land as what it was, rather than as threat to something carefully constructed, every one of the 9 kept that promise. Some kept it to their graves. A few, reaching the end of their own lives, decided that the 40 years had passed and the world deserved to know what they had carried. They spoke carefully and specifically, and without embellishment, the way people speak when they are telling something true that they have not been permitted to tell for a very long time. What they had witnessed was not Bruce Lee's most technically impressive performance. It was not the fight where his speed was most evident, or his power most undeniable, or his philosophy most cleanly expressed. It was the fight where all of those things were tested by someone who had trained his entire life specifically to test them, and where Bruce was hurt and out-pressured and brought to a moment where the fight could have ended in a way that the legend would have preferred it to end, and where he made a choice that had nothing to do with technique. He stopped the elbow 6 inches from the face of the man he had beaten. He helped him up. He bowed and meant it. The witnesses did not keep the secret because what they saw was shameful. They kept it because what they saw was too complete, too human, too true to survive public exposure, while the person it was about was still alive and still being turned into something that couldn't afford to bleed. They kept it because Bruce Lee asked them to, and because he understood something about his own legend that he was still in the process of building, that it needed time before it could hold the full truth of the man inside it. 9 witnesses, 1 room, 1 decision made in the space of a held breath, with an elbow 6 inches from someone's face, and everything the previous 5 minutes had built pointing in one direction, and a human being who chose a different one. That was Bruce Lee's most dangerous fight, and that choice was his greatest moment in it.